This is just the beginning.
Welcome to Recovery and Resilience, a virtual event. I'm Nicholas Johnston, Editor-in-Chief of Axios, coming to you from Arlington, Virginia. Thank you to Wells Fargo for making this conversation on minority-owned small business recovery in Los Angeles possible. Welcome to our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and on Axios.com. Join the conversation today on Twitter with @Axios and #AxiosEvents. Over the next 30 minutes, I'll be joined by my colleague Hope King and Courtney Brown. We will unpack the impact of the pandemic, focusing on how local businesses and policymakers are working to build a sustainable and lasting economic recovery in the Los Angeles area. Our first guest is California Congresswoman and House Small Business Committee member Judy Chu, joining us from Pasadena, California. Thanks for joining us virtually, Congresswoman.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I think the best place to kick this off is to get a sense of the problem. And as someone who serves on this committee and follows these issues very closely, and also is very familiar with what's happening in your district, could you give us a sense of the scope of the problem and how damaging the pandemic has been for small business, particularly minority-owned ones?
It has been so difficult for small businesses. I never dreamed that the ones who've closed would ever close, and yet they have done that. And of course, we know that so many businesses are hanging on by a thread. And so that's why the programs that we have, such as PPP and EIDL, are so important. And you are actually having this interview at an important time because May 3rd was the date that the Restaurant Revitalization Grant Program was started. We know that the small independent restaurants are particularly suffering. And so that's why in this last American Rescue Plan, we had the Restaurant Revitalization Grant Program, and restaurants have been waiting in line to get this. They will get a grant to make up for the losses that they've had between 2019 and 2020.
These programs so far, have they made a difference yet? Are we past the bottom, or are we still sort of on a downward trajectory with many of these small businesses?
I believe that we have made a difference. And in fact, I was very encouraged that the GDP grew by 6% in this last quarter. I was just kind of amazed, but I do think it's because of all this money that we've put into our economy through the CARES Act, the December package, and of course, the American Rescue Plan. However, I am very concerned about the disparities. And just on Sunday, the LA Times reported on something very, very startling. Actually, we in the House Small Business Committee were asking about the demographic data for the PPP loans for the longest time, but the Trump administration did not instruct the initial lenders to gather that. And as a result, we were never given it. I was chair of the Oversight Committee of the Small Business Committee, so I in particular was anxious to get it. But what the LA Times did on Sunday was to have a third party sue the SBA for the past information and then just doggedly go into that info itself. And what they found was that, yes, there definitely was a disparity, and that Latinos got the loans at half the rate that the regular population did, and the Black population were only able to get it by about 3/4 of what whites were able to get those loans.
Right. I mean, of course, we've seen throughout the pandemic how those kind of disparities and all sorts of the aid programs and all sorts of how distribution of medicines and vaccines. So from your viewpoint, looking at small businesses, how do you correct that?
Well, this is why we immediately put out a set-aside program. In fact, when I saw the danger, I led a letter to the SBA administrator as well as to Treasury to have a $60 billion set-aside program in which small community banks and credit unions, as well as the community development financial institutions and CDCs, could have a set-aside amount of money to distribute to underserved populations. And it is they who know the small business owners the best and are also easier to access. As it turned out, this set aside was very, very successful, and we did get many more of the loans out to the smallest of small business owners. We also did a number of other things in the American Rescue Plan to make things better. One very, very significant thing in this most recent bill is to have $100 million set aside for the Community Navigator Program, which would be a program to help those who are underserved, who may not be used to going through the bureaucracy. And so this will help them access these programs. Also, we're going to have an automatic grant program, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. Some of those earlier grant requesters could not get through SBA. And even though they were initially allowed to have a $10,000 grant straight out for their small business, they were only given $1,000, or maybe they couldn't get through it all. Well, if they were denied, they can get the balance so that they can get the total amount of $10,000 now.
This sounds like something you're touching on here, the importance of having people in the community, local organization in the community to help these small businesses navigate complicated government programs, it sounds like. That's a focus going forward, I guess, as well.
Yes, it's very, very important because the programs were difficult to put together, and they were also difficult for small businesses to navigate, especially if they were sole proprietors. And in fact, that's another good thing about Biden's most recent actions, is that they've made it easier for sole proprietors to get a more significant amount of money. They adjusted the rules so that there could be more given to them. And they also gave priority to those businesses with 10 employees or less.
Right. In the couple minutes we have left, what's on your agenda for coming next? What else does the government need to do? What is on your priority list to continue to aid small businesses?
Well, of course, we want to make sure that our second tranche of PPP loans is successful. So I want to tell all the businesses out there that they can go for a second time if their revenue loss was 25% or more. But I also want to have my Community Advantage bill passed. Community Advantage is a program, a pilot program that was started to help underserved businesses who might be otherwise turned away in the most popular SBA loan program called 7A. And so it allowed for more risk taking by the lenders for these particular businesses, which include people of color. So what I want to do is to make the Community Advantage program permanent, so more financial institutions will include this in their bank of options for credit giving.
Excellent. Congresswoman Chu, thank you so much for joining us virtually today. Next, we have a View from the Top segment with Axios CEO and co-founder Jim Van Dyke.
Thank you very much, Nick. It is now my pleasure to bring you a conversation with the CEO and president of Wells Fargo, Charlie Scharf. Thank you for joining us, Charlie. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Jim.
Your bank touches the lives of literally millions of people every day. You deal with countless small businesses. Like all of us, you've had to make adjustments during the pandemic. What were the most significant adjustments you had to make at Wells Fargo, especially to serve small businesses, many of whom kind of needed a lifeline to keep going during the darkest days of the pandemic?
Listen, I think your point is exactly right. I mean, there were just so many who needed all different types of support. And we recognized that from the very start. We recognized that we play an important role in supporting all of our customers, and particularly small businesses. First of all, from a service perspective, it was important that we were there day in and day out. So, we kept 70% of our branches open. That was the lowest. And at most times we had more branches open than that, while ensuring that we were doing it in the safest manner as possible, following CDC recommended safety protocols. But we also knew that we needed to help protect customers that were in need. And so, since January 1st of 2020, we've helped 3.7 million consumers and small businesses by deferring payments and waiving fees. We temporarily suspended residential property foreclosures, evictions, and involuntary auto repossessions. And we worked to keep over 200,000 individuals housed through our support of rent relief, eviction protection, and other things. But more broadly, we also saw that many families just were in need of basic food. And so we provided 82 million meals to families in need, both by our own events, but also with a $10 million donation to Feeding America. And I also think it's critical to know that we recognize that even with our extremely broad reach, with all the communities we touch, we can't do everything ourselves. And so we look to Black-owned minority deposit institutions to see how we could help them. We've invested in 11 of them across the country, including Broadway Federal in Los Angeles. And this was part of a $50 million commitment to support MDIs, which we know help support some of the most diverse small business owners. So there's still so much more that we have to do, but I'm proud of what we've done to safely support our customers and communities, but also each other within Wells Fargo, who so desperately we need to work for our customers day in and day out.
You're so deeply rooted in the community, and obviously you have like amazing real-time financial data on what your customers are doing. As you look at what seems to be a recovery, and maybe even the beginning of what could be an economic boom, if we can keep the virus at bay for a long enough period and vaccinations continue apace, what do you see happening in the next couple of months? Like, what gives you optimism and what gives you some pause?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, because I think we should be encouraged by the significant rise in vaccination rates that we've seen, but also recognize that it's going to take a very, very long time to have the distribution of vaccine as widely as is necessary to return the country to what really was pre-pandemic. And so as part of that, we just look at it and say that the pandemic caused great harm to small businesses and entrepreneurs, especially the diverse small business owners, which such an important part of the small business population. And the pandemic continues to cause significant challenges for the small businesses that we know are the backbone of the economies and communities that we're all watching. And so, I think it's just critical that we recognize that even though we're seeing this recovery that you referenced, it isn't even. And we recognize that many businesses will continue to need our help, especially diverse small businesses, as all haven't benefited equally from the recovery. And so, we're very focused on, the role that, we play as a lender through PPP, but also the things that we're doing directly ourselves. And PPP, we helped more than 274,000 customers, $13.6 billion of loans representing 1.7 million jobs. Current loan size is just $40,000. And in California, we were a top PPP participant, lending a little less than $8.5 billion to small businesses, which is 586,000 jobs. So I think, that is, what we're looking to continue to provide relief for small businesses in need. But also, we created our own fund called the Open for Business Fund. We were paid $420 million roughly in fees by the government for our work on PPP. And our view is that those dollars were really meant to support small businesses. And so how could we be really impactful? And our answer was to put it back into the community. So we're donating all $420 million to support small businesses.
And when you take it down to that very local branch, like in the community, on my block, like what can Wells Fargo's do for sort of the nonprofit community leader, especially in the context of helping small businesses?
Yeah. So listen, I just go back to, the way we think about small businesses, because that just is what drives so much of our effort, which is that small businesses are the lifeblood of many of the cities across this country, especially Los Angeles. And I found out that 93% of Los Angeles businesses have fewer than 20 employees, which is just striking. And so, it's just the reality that Los Angeles is home to so many small and, micro businesses. And so we recognize that there is, a tremendous amount that we have to do. And I think the way to think about it is that, we look to partnerships in addition to what we can do for ourselves. And the Open for Business Fund is actually doing that. And so the first $250 million of that fund is being allocated to CDFIs so that they can extend capital to small businesses on a much broader and a much more local basis than we can probably do on our own. And so, we've intentionally pursued this in the form of grants, which improves their balance sheets. And, they can help small businesses, many of whom are diverse or women-owned, obtain funding that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to do. They can also leverage that capital 3-to-1. And so I think it's just a meaningful way for us to work with, partners to have a much broader reach and a much more substantial impact.
Charlie, we appreciate this conversation. We appreciate Wells Fargo making the broader conversation about the economic recovery possible today. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate the time.
And over to you, Courtney.
I'm Courtney Brown, and I am the markets reporter for Axios. Our next guest is Holly Mitchell, the Los Angeles County Supervisor. She represents the 2nd District. Thank you so much for being with us, Holly.
Good afternoon, Courtney. I appreciate being here.
So, Holly, you're one of 5 people that make the laws to govern the most populous county in the U.S. And we should mention that since you were elected to that board, for the first time ever, the board is comprised of all women for the first time ever. So, okay, go women. From where you sit, what should viewers understand about the state of small businesses in LA County?
Well, I have to say I'm very proud of the county's really progressive, aggressive response to supporting our small minority women-owned businesses. When the federal government came in and provided loans to the Small Business Associate Administration, a number of our small minority-owned businesses didn't qualify. They didn't have the banking relationships. And so it was really important. This is an opportunity where government really should and can intervene to provide support. So we directed over $170 million of our initial funding through the CARES Act to support them. We came up with a social impact fund to provide grants to micro businesses. And I say small employers because it really is not only small businesses, but the nonprofit community, community-based organizations, and the faith-based community that employ a significant percentage, quite frankly, of the residents of LA County. And so the dollars that we were able to put into the social impact fund, directing additional resources to specific sectors where we find small business. We provided resources to the arts and culture sector, the child care industry, really, small business pillars in our community, where we find a disproportionate number of them in communities of color. And so that, I think, is not only what LA County did, but the fundamental role of government in a public health economic crisis that we found ourselves in.
I want to ask you about some of the minority-owned businesses in your district. At the national level, the Federal Reserve put out new research last month that found that COVID-19 impacted communities and small businesses of color to a greater extent, much more than they did their white counterparts. And we're going to be speaking with a minority-owned bookstore in your district in a few minutes. But I'm curious, from your view, have minority-owned businesses in your district been hit harder?
Absolutely. LA Times and another think tank did a report, really recognized that a dangerously high number of small businesses, particularly in the Brown, Black, and Latinx community, didn't receive the same disproportionate support from the federal government as they experienced the COVID impact, quite frankly. And so we've seen thousands of small business closures across this region. The current number I've seen is somewhere in the neighborhood of 15,000. And my deep concern is that a disproportionate number of them will be the businesses that we're talking about, minority-owned, women-owned, micro enterprises. One of the grant programs that we initiated here at LA County recognized the fact that 20% of small businesses have no employees, they're sole proprietors. And those are the kinds of organizations that really did not qualify or didn't have the long-term banking relationships to allow them to be competitive and qualify for the federal loans. So again, we're focused on grants coupled with loans for those organizations that, if they put both of those together, will be able to maintain the employment of their small workforce.
So things are starting to look up. I saw that Los Angeles County reported no new deaths from COVID-19 this past weekend. So that's a great thing. So
that's
as we kind of
huge milestone for us.
Absolutely, especially when you consider that that area was a huge hotspot over the course of the pandemic. But as we emerge from the kind of the depths of the crisis and things are starting to look up, what types of policies are you all advocating for to jumpstart recovery for minority-owned businesses?
Well, I'm thrilled that the county is looking to receive somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.9 billion with a B dollars as a result of the American Rescue Plan. Again, it's a crisis like this that shows everybody the value and the role government can play. And in this instance, Congress and this new administration has taken decisive action to provide support to local government, states, counties, and cities. And so LA County is looking at $1.9 billion. And my fellow supervisors and I are in the process of really beginning to talk about and shape what that investment must look like. From my perspective, given the district I represent, it's got to be focused on equity. Equity must be the lens through which we look at investment, recognizing the disproportionate impact communities of color have had as a result of this virus. And so we're very excited to be putting together a plan that, again, will be centered around equity and to create innovative programs to support small businesses. We're looking at small business incubators, opportunities to support young people in coming into small business. When I say small business incubator, we also recognize that many small businesses need the technical support in order to navigate grant applications, even through governmental entities. And so we really intend to be on the ground, investing significant numbers of dollars through an equity lens and meeting small employers where they are to provide the kind of infusion of grant dollars they need to be able to recover quickly and in a healthy way.
This was an audience question we got, and I just think it's such a great question. What have you been particularly inspired to see over the course of the pandemic? There was obviously a lot of tragedy. You mentioned how many small businesses, particularly small businesses owned by people of color, that have not fared so well. Have there been any new business ventures started or needs being met in a way that might not have happened had there been no pandemic?
Small businesses are an integral part of our community, and to see community rise to the occasion and evolve, the county level, the state actually as well, created a program targeting restaurants. We recognize that so many of our adult and senior feeding programs shut down through the senior centers. And so government was able to contract with restaurants throughout LA County to pay them the dollars that we would typically be using for special events or these feeding programs to allow to support the restaurants and to provide resources to families and seniors and others who weren't able to get out and access food. And so the food giveaway programs, the restaurants stepping up, and the general public coming forward to provide support, to deliver meals. Government was able to contract with Uber and many of the transit programs to provide these delivery services. I met a young woman who runs an arts program who understood that when she goes to the west side of LA County to the farmers market, that she didn't see many people of color making that trek, and yet she saw farmers of color. So she was able to, as an artist, convert her loft into a food giveaway where she negotiated an agreement between farmers of color to bring a farmers market directly into the community, into the Watts Willowbrook area. And so it was innovative ideas like that where people saw an unmet need and didn't stand back to say, gee, somebody ought to do something about that. We stepped in and filled the gap. And so the unique partnerships that I've seen forged between government, the nonprofit sector, in vaccine dissemination. We've had a hard time getting vaccine to communities of color, the hardest hit communities. So for a county Department of Public Health to partner with federally qualified health centers and churches and nonprofit organizations to do pop-up vaccination sites in shopping malls, at metro stations, in parks, in the parking lots of churches, to me is a sign of when we all come together, we can fight this. And that's the one thing, not only does it motivate me now, it's also the one piece that I hope doesn't go away when we navigate our way through and out of this pandemic. These nurturing relationships that continue to provide critical services to our shared constituency.
Thank you so much, Holly Mitchell. It's great to see you, great to meet you. Thank you for joining us. And now I'm going to toss it over to my colleague, Hope King.
I'm Hope King, business reporter for Axios. Our final guest is the co-owner of SO1 Books, James Fugate, joining us from Los Angeles, California. Hello, James.
Hello, Hope. Thank you for having me.
We are so excited to have you. James, you have one of the oldest and most well-known bookstores in the LA area and really in the country. I want you to sort of walk us through what the last year has been like for you and the way that you've had to change the way that you've had to run your shop.
Well, it's been a hard year, I think, for everybody. And for us, there's never been a year like last year, from the shock of the pandemic happening and then having to close. We weren't sure how we were going to function. We immediately cut our salaries, Tom Hamilton, myself. We lost one of our valued crew members who was a student at USC. And he's from Oakland, so he went back to Oakland to do Zoom classes. But we were managing fairly well, even when we were closed, with online sales. At the time, we were a third-party seller on Amazon. That was helping quite a bit. And then people would call the store and we would mail books out to them. But that all changed with the murder of George Floyd. And then the governor allowed stores to begin to reopen the first week of June, I think it was. And we were literally overwhelmed with orders, that were shocking to us, just absolutely shocking.
In some ways, that may have offset some of the decline in your business, did it?
Not only did it offset the decline in the business, but we ended up having one of the best years we've ever had. I think people being at home nationwide and seeing that horrible video over and over on all these different stations, seeing those in the protests that happened all last summer. And then a number of people, Ibrahim Kahindi seems to be one that we really know of, but a lot of other people really started saying that this has been a problem in America for a very long time, and that the history of it goes back well before George Floyd, and that they started pushing people to read books and try to understand what had happened. And that is what set in motion this great surge at stores like ours and others. Because one thing Ibrahim said on a radio program, was a nationwide radio program, is that people should go to African-American bookstores. He may have mentioned ours because he's a friend of the store. We posted him a couple times. And I worked at Florida A&M. He's a graduate of Florida A&M. I hope that helped. But it was really, in some ways, it was very sad because, I as somebody that's in his mid-60s, I've seen this since I was a kid, but I think a lot of people never really understood that this was going on and that it's happened. And no matter what the circumstances of George, if it's a fake $20 bill or whatever, at some point, everyone realized this guy does not deserve this. And it's different from Rodney King, which everyone saw. I think the internet played a big, big role in it. I think talk radio played a big role in it, but it was quite a year last year.
You've described it as being bittersweet, that you did see such a surge in demand for the books, for people coming to your store and seeking your guidance on what to read. I wonder if that support has continued now as we are nearing the 1-year anniversary of his murder, of his death?
Yes, it has continued. We still see every day a lot of sales online. We still have people coming to the store all the time. Since we started and really the Los Angeles Times Book Fair way back in the early 90s, we have had a very multiracial group that has come by the bookstore. But we have seen that in Leimert Park, where our store is at now. We have seen it every single day. It can be Black, white, Asian. It can be people from out of state, even people from Australia. We had a number of orders from Australia last year, which were very surprising.
Now, when you think about how you've had to operate, even under the challenging conditions that the LA area faced specifically, while trying to keep up with demand, how did you balance? I mean, you said you had to cut staff, you had to cut your salary. I mean, did you have to change hours? What were some other adjustments that you've had to make in order to keep the store running, but also, again, to keep up with that huge demand?
Well, we actually we would be open from 10 to 5, but we had so many online sales, so we just could not process them. Now, the American booksellers helped a great deal. Without their bulk ordering process, that really helped us. But then we had a lot of in-store orders we had to fill. And, I remember one day I got to work around 5 a.m. And when I turned into the little spot, Tom's car, my partner, was already there. I was shocked because I'm the one that gets there usually pretty early. He'll stay late. And he had stayed pretty much he said he got there around 11 and stayed till about 6. Then he came back. But we would get there very early, and we just realized we were killing ourselves. We just didn't have the staff, and people keep thinking it's easy, but bookstores they're great to run, but it's a lot. It's a process. You have to know how to do the orders, and it was a lot of work to try to train someone new to do those orders and then have them done right. Because we had a lot of customer service issues, and we had to try to respond to all of those. So it was really something incredible to see. When we said we'd go from 12 to 4, it allowed us really to catch up to all those online orders, be ready for people when they came in, because unpacking the books, we were getting 10, 15 cartons of books sometimes 2, 3, or 4 times a week. But it took us a little while to all of that done.
What was the most important thing, do you think, that you received in aid as a small business that you needed in order to keep going during this past year?
Well, I think the support of people like Issa Rae, who has the Insecure program. She did an interview with me on Zoom that people from all over the country came to buy the store. We've had people from Georgia, Louisiana, but just those type of things. We recently did one with President Obama, who we've hosted twice. So we have a connection with him. But all of those little things like that, the NAACP did their Image Awards, and they wanted to do the feature award from our store. And people saw that, and it was amazing. But also the media. I mean, the New York Times, the LA Times, Washington Post, now Axios. It's been amazing because we've been around over 30 years, and we have been, I think, a real part of the Los Angeles book selling scene, especially since that LA Times book fair that we used to do every year. And people got to know us through events. But all of that support has really helped us.
And I know that for them, the names that you mentioned, your support of them is also why they are in the position to give back and to highlight you guys and spotlight you guys again. So, James, thank you for sharing your story with us. Best of luck for the store. James Fugate is at SO1 in Los Angeles. And we thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you for having me too, Hope.
Well, thank you all for joining this afternoon for another virtual conversation that has made everyone smarter, faster. Thank you to our sponsor, Wells Fargo, for making this event possible. For more information or to sign up for the Axios AM newsletter or Courtney's Axios Closer newsletter, visit axios.com/newsletters or on the Axios app. Thank you all for joining, and we'll see you on axios.com.